I'd like to have a word of prayer. Is that okay? All right, let's pray. Our Father in heaven, Lord, in all things we need your help. And I am no expert, but you are the great physician. So we come to you asking that you would be here in this room, that your Spirit would speak revelations to our hearts and our minds. May our hearts burn within us today. In Jesus' name, amen. Our subject for now is autoimmunity. And we have the little subheading, the body's civil war. And my question is there, how many people here either know someone personally or know someone who has or has themselves an autoimmune disorder? Does anyone know? Okay, so that's a good amount of people. You know someone. And if you could help them, would you want to help them? Okay. Well, that's what we want to do. We want to understand what we're talking about, and then we want to figure out, well, what do we do about it, right? So, the body's civil war. What is civil war? No, you don't have pages on this, so you got to pay attention. You have no choice. That was intentional. Civil war. And don't worry, if you want copies of these things, we can get you copies of them afterwards. But still want you to pay attention. Okay, civil war. What is civil war? It's a war between opposing groups of citizens of the same country, right? Of course, we know of the American Civil War, 1861 to 1865, and it started in April 12th when rebels had opened fire on Fort Sumter in Charleston, South Carolina. And we know that it ended in 1865. And April 9th, Robert E. Lee surrendered the last Confederate Army to Ulysses S. Grant. Those of you who are history people know this, and those of you who are international may not know this, which is okay. But there was a conflict within our country. Brethren, fighting against one another, right? But civil war did not just happen in this country. It happened in other countries as well, right? And yeah, in France and other places, there have been civil wars throughout Earth's history of people claiming to be on the same side, but fighting against one another, right? Or fighting for their version of what they think is right. Actually, we can find an example of this in the Bible. In Judges chapter 7, I thought this was interesting. A different type of civil war. It was unplanned. An unplanned civil war. Judges chapter 7, verses 20 to 23. Have you all heard of Gideon? Yeah. I like Gideon. That guy's a soldier. Judges chapter... I'm sorry, I never introduced myself, by the way. My name is Ashwin Sukumaran. I wasn't here on the first night. I apologize for that. I was traveling. And I work on the medical staff here as one of the lifestyle practitioners. And so I am pleased to meet you, finally. And back to Judges chapter 7 now. I want to introduce you to Gideon. And what happened when they fought this battle here. Judges 7 verse 20, it says, and the three companies blew the trumpets and brake the pitchers and held the lamps in their left hands and the trumpets in their right hands to blow withal. And they cried, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And they stood every man in his place round about the camp. And all the host ran and cried and fled. And the 300 blew the trumpets, and the Lord set... Now this is the point. It says here, the Lord set every man's sword against his fellow. This was an unplanned civil war, right? There was confusion in the camp, right? Because they got confused. They hear the sound, they see lights, they see people running, and they're confused, and they start fighting one another when they should have been fighting the enemy, right? But they started fighting one another. there is an unplanned civil war that happens in our bodies, and we refer to this as autoimmune disease or disorders. Now, I will say this, I'm not a rheumatologist, I don't specialize in autoimmune disorders, I'm learning just like you, okay? And so, hopefully we'll try to develop these concepts, and then if we have questions, we'll try to answer them as we go or after, okay? And we'll probably have to skip some of the things, but we'll try to hit the key points. So, what is your immune system? What is your immune system? Immune system is designed to defend the body against foreign or dangerous invaders. Such invaders include microorganisms, like germs, bacteria, viruses, all those things, right? Parasites, such as worms or whatever, ticks. Cancer cells. Yes, your immune system is designed to kill cancer. There are certain cells that have the ability to destroy tumor cells, right? And even transplanted organs and tissues, right? To defend the body against these invaders, the immune system must be able to distinguish, now this is key, the immune system must be able to distinguish between what belongs to the body, we call this self, okay, and what does not belong to the body, or non-self, or foreign, right? Remember that unplanned civil war that we just saw in Judges? This happens all the time in the body because the body suddenly can't recognize what is self, what's on my team, and what's not on my team. Okay? We're going to look more into what the immune system is. Any substances that are identified as non-self, so this is not, it could be on your team, it may not be on your team, but the body says this is an enemy, right? No matter who it actually is. Any substances that are identified as non-self, particularly if they are perceived as dangerous, stimulate an immune response in the body. Such substances are called antigens. So an antigen, right, is something that alerts the immune system and says, I'm not from around here. I'm not on your team, okay? That's what an antigen is. I'm not on your team. Antigens may be contained within or on bacteria, viruses, or microorganisms, or cancer cells. Antigens may also exist on their own, for example, as food molecules or pollen. A normal immune response consists of recognizing a potentially harmful foreign antigen, activating and mobilizing forces to defend against it, and attacking it. If the immune system malfunctions and mistakes self for non-self, it may attack the body's own tissues, causing an autoimmune disorder such as rheumatoid arthritis, thyroiditis, lupus, etc. Right? There's a general overview of some of the organs of the system, and by the way, one of the things that I like to consider part of the immune system, which is not listed, I don't think it is, is actually your skin, because your skin is your first line of defense. Anything that punctures the skin, or different membranes, like you have membranes on your eyes and all these things, anything that gets past the first line of defense, now the body calls for reinforcements. Okay, something got past our wall, right? Does that make sense so far? Okay, tell me if I'm not making sense. Chances are I probably will not realize it myself. Okay, the cardinal features of just now, that's an example of me not making sense. Okay, the cardinal features of the immune system. So let's just hit some key points and then we'll get to some more colorful slides. Cardinal features of the immune system. The immune system is a dynamic network of immune organs and immune cells that recognizes self from non-self. We just talked about that. The immune system responds in distinct and different ways to different foreign agents. So for some responses, yes. No, it's not. We just, you don't have notes so that you can take notes. So we had mentioned it at the beginning that if you want copies of these, we can make those available. Otherwise, take notes, okay? The cardinal feature of the immune system consists of an interaction between antigen or agent that is recognized as foreign and an antibody or an immune cell. So here we have an antigen or agent, something that's foreign. The body says this is not on our side, right? And then you have an antibody or an immune cell. Now these are on your side. These are the soldiers that your body creates to attack the things that don't belong there, right? And to get rid of them. So those are your antibodies. That helps the soldiers, the white cells, to recognize what is part of the system that should be there and what should not be there. Does that make sense? Okay, good. The cardinal features of the immune system, it has a memory. Did you know that? Your immune system can remember things. When you're exposed to something, it actually develops a system to remember that thing, and you develop antibodies to that thing, and then you become immune, quote unquote, to it, right? The communication between immune cells and recognition of antigen dependent on an elaborate system of membrane molecules such as MHC, major histocompatibility complex, which distinguishes self from non-self, and the cytokines, which form a communication link between immune cells and other tissues and organs of the body. I realize that that is another language for many people, so we will try to explain that a little bit more as we go on. Okay. Now, these are different types of cells. Okay. So you have a blood stem cell, and basically you can it breaks off, and you can form different types of cells. It further differentiates and branches out into what your body needs, right? So over here on I guess on your left would be how you get red cells and platelets, and then certain types of white cells, eosinophils, basophils. Those can be elevated when you have an allergic reaction or parasitic infection. Neutrophils, which are good for handling those big bacterial infections, right? And then you have these over here, the lymphocytes, right? And you have different types of lymphocytes. You have B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes, and you have natural killer cells. And we'll look at what the significance of this is. What are these different cells good for in your body? Why are they there, right? Did you know there are some types of T lymphocytes, for example? There are helper T cells. Has anyone ever heard of this before? There are helper T cells, and then there's something else called a cytotoxic T cell. Have you heard of that before? These cytotoxic T cells and helper T cells can actually kill cancer cells. They can recognize, they can attach to them, they can phagocytize or eat these things. So you have different types of cells that are good for different types of things. Now, they can also do that to viruses. They can also do that to bacteria. They can also do it to many things. But we tend to think of it only for the simple things, quote unquote, for bacteria and viruses. But actually, the body is designed to handle quite a lot of things that we don't necessarily need drug medications for. But we're just not helping the body do what it needs to do. Right? So that's what our goal is, try to find out how can we help the body do what it needs to do so that it doesn't attack self, right? All right. So disorders of the immune system occur when the body generates an immune response against itself, obviously. The body cannot generate appropriate immune responses against invading microorganisms, or an excessive immune response, right, to often harmless foreign antigens damages normal tissues. Now, your body actually cleans up tissues normally, right? When you break down muscle cells and other things, your cells are constantly growing and dividing, and they're also dying, right? And where does it go? Well, your body has to handle it, right? And so there are systems set in place where your body can actually clean up, your white cells can go and clean up things that don't necessarily belong there at the moment, right? And when this process can actually get out of hand and it can go to excess, and instead of just cleaning up the things that need to go, it starts trying to clean up things that need to stay. Okay? Now, here are the lines of defense. So the body has a series of defenses. Yes? Okay. The body has a series of defenses, including physical barriers, right? So the physical barrier, the first line of defense, is a physical barrier such as the skin, the cornea of the eyes, the membranes lining the respiratory, digestive, urinary, and reproductive tracts. Those are all considered the outside of the body, you know what I mean? Because it hasn't penetrated inside under the skin. And as long as these barriers remain unbroken, many invaders cannot enter the body. Right? For example, if extensive burn damage is on skin, the risk of infection is increased. Why? Because the skin barrier is now broken. Right? White blood cells. The next line of defense. So let's say something gets in, it breaks the barrier. Somewhere past the skin, wherever. It broke the barrier and it got in. Now this is your next line of defense in your immune system. Okay? Your next line of defense involves your white cells, your leukocytes. And they travel through the bloodstream into tissues, searching for and attacking things that don't belong there. Right? And it has two parts, innate immunity, acquired immunity. We don't really have time to go into all of that. You have types of white cells like phagocytes. Phagocytes are the ones that eat the infections. Okay? And these would include macrophages, neutrophils, monocytes, dendritic cells. Then you have natural killer cells, which are ready to recognize and kill certain types of things, right? Wow, I realize you cannot see that at all. I'm so sorry. I can't even see it on my laptop. Let me read it to you. This is about inflammation. Inflammation occurs because, okay, so there are molecules that are released. There are chemicals that are released by certain types of white cells, okay? And they release these, I'm not reading now, I'm trying to summarize here. They release these chemicals which basically isolates the infection, isolates the invader, okay? And so in an inflammatory response, you'll usually see heat in the area, right? So let's say, has anyone ever had an abscess before or a boil? Okay, so this is a common one. I like to use it because everyone can relate. In an abscess, it's warm, right? It's painful, right? And it's usually really, really red. No matter what color skin you are, it's gonna be red, right? And cellulitis. Any type of itis is an inflammation, right? So if you hit your hand and you see it starts turning red in that area, there's an inflammatory response, right? People with arthritis, you can see that they will often have swollen joints, right? Have you ever seen that before? Someone who has like a really swollen, sometimes deformed joint. And so there's inflammation. There's an inflammatory process that's happening there. But why is that process happening? That's what we want to understand. Because in autoimmune disorders, these inflammatory processes happen when it's not necessarily called for. Now, inflammation is a good thing. Did you know that? It is the body's effort to isolate and destroy whatever the antigen, the foreign thing is, right? But when this inflammation is happening, when it's not called for, then there's a problem, right? There's a problem. Now, let's try to understand, what is disease? Now this is, I got this from Merriam-Webster. Disease is a condition of the living animal or plant body or of one of its parts that impairs normal functioning and is typically manifested by distinguishing signs and symptoms, sickness or malady. Now no, the signs and symptoms are only an indication that a condition exists, right? That's causing dysfunction. The signs and symptoms itself is not the problem. The signs and symptoms tell us that there is a problem. Does that make sense? Now, I really like this definition. Disease is an effort of nature. Disease is an effort of nature to free the system from conditions that result from a violation of the laws of health. I'm going to read that one more time. Disease is an effort of nature to free the system from conditions that result from violation of the laws of health. What does that mean? Well, if there is a disease, is disease a good thing or a bad thing? In this context, it's actually is it part of the problem or part of the solution? Okay, according to this, it's part of the solution, right? It's the body trying to free the system from what? So I heard the word, someone said it, starts with a C. A condition, right? The disease is nature trying to free the system from a condition, right? So the condition is the problem, right? And this condition comes, of course, as you all said, from a violation of the laws of health, right? So here's the road to health. Let's say you're driving down your car, you're driving down the road in your car. So you're supposed to tell me when I'm not making sense. All right, so you're driving down the road in your car. And as you're driving, has anyone had this experience? Maybe you don't have to raise your hand, but you maybe wake up to this sound. Okay, so a few people have. I am thankful I haven't had that specific rude awakening. But let's say you start hitting these little, what are they called? Does anyone know what they're called? Just bumps. They're just little bumps. They're not. I don't think they're speed bumps. They're alert bumps or something. Whatever. We'll call it alert bumps. And so you hit these things. What is the purpose of that? The purpose is to notify you that you're not on the road, right? You're not on the right path, right? That's the purpose of those, whatever they're called, right? It's to let you know you need to change direction, right? What happens if you ignore it? Okay. So here we go. Here's the road to health. And now we start seeing an alert. You following me? And what happens if we do nothing to help that condition? One way or the other. Either you cross the barrier and you hit a car, or you wrap your car around a tree. Either way, death, right? So the disease, the thing that is alerting you that there's a condition that exists, is there to tell you it's time to change directions. We need to do something to help the situation, not just sit there and straddle the shoulder, right? So, back to some boring terms again. Ready? TNF-alpha. I wasn't kidding when I said it's a boring term. TNF-alpha stands for tumor necrosis factor alpha. Okay? And what is it? What is it? Tumor necrosis factor, or TNF-alpha, is a cytokine, or a cell signaling protein, which acts as a central regulator of inflammation. The majority of TNF-alpha is produced by macrophages, a type of white blood cell. Okay? But a wide variety of other cell types can also produce it. Okay? Now, why am I bringing this up all of a sudden? Well, let's look at it. Remember, disease is an effort of what? Nature. It's an effort of nature. The body's trying to correct something. Right? Now look at TNF-alpha. TNF-alpha exists as a transmembrane protein arranged in a stable homotrimer. A soluble form of TNF-alpha can be produced by... Okay, you know what? I'm going to skip this part. Let me just go to the next part. TNF-alpha signaling is an essential part of the immune system as it inhibits tumorigenesis, or the new tumor growth. It inhibits tumor growth. Okay? It prevents viral replication. So viruses, when you get a virus, it gets in and it basically copies itself and tries to take over your body. And this TNF-alpha helps to prevent that, right? And it is endogenous pyrogen inducing fever and apoptosis. So basically what that means is there's a thing called a pyrogen, and it tells your hypothalamus under your brain that we need to raise your temperature. And when you raise the body's temperature, your immune system is now stimulated. Your white cells are now mobilizing, right? And there's a lot that's happening. Actually, the production of these things are increasing. So, and apoptosis is programmed cell death. What does that mean? Well, your cells, which are damaged, must die, right? Or these damaged cells will continue to grow and do what they're not supposed to do. But even regular cells, at some point, are programmed to die. And so this basically helps the regular cells to die at their appropriate time so that the new cells can take their place. Does that make sense? Okay, so this TNF-alpha does all of these things. Dysregulation of this pathway has been implicated in a variety of disorders, including cancer, autoimmune disease, Alzheimer's, depression, and various anti-TNF drugs have been approved for the treatment of inflammatory-related diseases, including rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's disease, and psoriasis. So, what does that mean? It means that in a traditional setting, you ask any doctor or any practitioner, whoever you want, they'll tell you. I mean, usually what they do for inflammatory diseases or autoimmune diseases is they would many times prescribe something that suppresses TNF alpha, such as interferon. Has anyone heard of interferon? Interferon, the purpose of that is to suppress TNF alpha, okay? To suppress the inflammatory response. That's the idea. Now this I found was very interesting, and it was actually controversial. In 2001 and 2003, Dr. Faustman, this is a PhD doctor, published 2 highly controversial studies in top journals. In Faustman's experiments, 75 to 85% of mice were permanently cured of type 1 diabetes. So what happened? They had these diabetic rats, or mice, sorry. If anyone's a mouse lover, just in case. There are these diabetic mice, and they weren't just any type of diabetic, they were a type 1 diabetic. Now, the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes is that in type 2 diabetes, this is the one that most people have. In type 2 diabetes, as Dr. Sanchez talked about yesterday, there's fat, and the fat is preventing insulin from acting, and so insulin can't act, and so sugar can't get in the cell, right? That's type 2 diabetes in a nutshell. And so the person is producing insulin, but their insulin is not being used efficiently. Does that make sense? Okay. In type 1 diabetes, the person is not producing insulin. Either sometimes they are producing some, but it's not sufficient to cover their needs, right? So in type 1 diabetes, the cells in the pancreas is where you produce your insulin, and there are cells called beta islet cells. And in type 1 diabetes, these beta islet cells are not functioning. They're not producing insulin, right? And it was thought for years that this is a result of an autoimmune reaction. In other words, the immune system began attacking the cells of the pancreas, right? And when that happened, of course, the function of the pancreas decreased, which is putting out insulin amongst other things as well, right? So they did this study on these mice, and these were type 1 diabetic mice, so they would be insulin dependent, right? And when they did this experiment, I'll tell you what it was in a minute, 75 to 85% of mice were permanently cured of type 1 diabetes. Their pancreas spontaneously regenerated, and their blood sugar levels returned to normal. Now, what they did, I'm not necessarily advocating what they did, but I thought it was interesting that what they did was the opposite of what traditional medicine says to do when you have an autoimmune response. So, what did they do? Well, they found out during this experiment that there is a specific type of T cell. Remember we looked at the different types of white cells? And there's one type of T cell that they found which was damaged. And this damaged T cell, or several damaged T cells were going around, and they were actually attacking the pancreas. So they said, well, if we can learn how to kill these damaged T cells, then we can stop the thing that's attacking the pancreas, right? And so that's what they did. And so, here, let me show you what they said. Autoreactive T cells are more susceptible to the action of a signaling protein known as TNF alpha. That's the thing we just talked about, right? I told you, there's a lot of boring terms in this. I promise it's going to get interesting. Autoreactive T cells are more susceptible to the action of a signaling protein known as TNF alpha, which initiates the process of cell death only in defective T cells. And this is interesting. Faustman's lab was able to use TNF alpha to kill off only those misbehaving T cells. The thing that astonished Felsman and her team the most was that when you killed off just the incorrectly functioning T cells, it not only stopped the disease, it allowed the body to regenerate the insulin-producing islet cells, reversing the disease entirely. That was interesting. Now, the way that they did it was not with any natural means, but the way they did it was they're experimenting currently with something called BCGs. You all have heard of BCGs, some vaccines, and of course I'm not necessarily advocating that because there are other problems with taking those things. But it was just interesting that the whole concept behind autoimmune disease is suppress this thing. But now you have somebody who's researching and they're saying, well, use this thing instead of suppressing it and see what happens. Why do they want to suppress it? Well, because in many people with autoimmune diseases, TNF-alpha is elevated. So they say, well, because it's elevated, it must be bad. But just because something is elevated doesn't mean it's bad. No, remember, disease is an effort of nature. Disease is an effort of nature. Now, this is getting into some other things we'll get into in just a minute. But disease is an effort of nature, and many times there are things that the body is trying to do. The body is bringing an inflammatory response because there's something wrong. Right? So what do? We suppress that thing. Now, it is known, I mean, we know that many of these, the traditional treatments, they might help for a time, but they never cure the disease. They never do. Right? Now, these T cells, how did they become damaged in the first place? How do any of our cells become damaged in the first place? If you get improper sunshine, do your cells live or die? Too little or too much, will your cells have problem? Yes, they will. If you don't get enough sleep, will your cells have problems? Oh yes, they will. They won't repair, right? If you don't get enough air or oxygen, will your cells live or die? They will eventually die. I mean, if you cut off oxygen from any of your tissues, the tissues distal to that obstruction will die. We call this a heart attack or a stroke. You can see it in different parts of the body, but you can see it, I mean, not just in the heart or in the brain, you can see it anywhere in the body. If you cut off the circulation, anything past that point will die because there's no oxygen and no nutrients is the other thing. If you get improper nutrition, will your cells live or die? They will die, right? What about water? If you don't get enough, will your cells live or die? They will die. Lack of temperance, if you get too little or too much of any of these things, will your cells live or die? They die. Now, the reason for this is because of oxidative damage. Has anyone heard of oxidative damage? I don't know if you even talked about it this seminar yet. Has anyone spoken about oxidative damage yet? Oh, that's surprising. Okay, but let me just mention it. Wow. Let me mention it briefly, and we'll move along here. This is a stable molecule here on the left in blue, and this is a free radical. Has anyone heard of a free radical? Okay, you've heard of free radicals, and these free radicals look just like a stable molecule, except they're missing an electron. Okay, they're missing this electron, and so what does it do? It tries to stabilize himself, and so when he comes in contact with another stable molecule, he'll actually steal one of his electrons for himself. So when he does that, how many free radicals do we now have? See, now we have one, because this one became stable, but this one now becomes the free radical. Does that make sense? And this becomes a chain reaction, and this actually damages DNA. It damages cells. Right? So we have cells that are becoming damaged because of our lifestyle, because of our choices. The things that we do to ourselves are literally damaging to the cells of the body at the genetic level. It's damaging our DNA, actually. Did you know that? This is one of the reasons for cancer, and why in cancer treatments from a natural standpoint, you flood the body with something called anyone know? Someone said it, antioxidants. Antioxidants it actually ceases this process. And why? Because you have a stable molecule which has an extra electron. And it's stable with or without that extra. So it can donate to the free radical, and everyone's happy. You make antioxidants in your body. Did you know that? You make them, but you don't have enough to cover for the amount of damage that you do to it daily. And so we have to intake it through our diet. Through getting the berries, the fruits, the vegetables. These things are all high in antioxidants. Okay, again, what is disease? Disease is an effort of nature. Disease is an effort of nature. The body is trying to solve our problem. And our problem is that we violated laws of health. Okay, and I usually have a whole lecture just on that itself. What is the true law of health? We're not going to get into that. But there's a condition that results from this, and the body's trying to get rid of it. Now, we need to help the body instead of hurting it, right? We need to help the body instead of hurting it. So, this is a short list of autoimmune diseases. Rheumatoid arthritis, Hashimoto. There's more. It goes on. It goes on. This is just the short list, okay? Now, these and I call it the short list because this is the list of things that people are more aware of. But I suspect, and there are others who estimate that there are other diseases that are autoimmune that we just don't know they're autoimmune yet, right? And the interesting thing about autoimmune diseases is that they just kind of suddenly exploded. You didn't hear about these things 30, 40, 50 years ago. Not like now, right? And so what this chart shows is, this is the United States prevalence of these diseases per 100. So rheumatoid arthritis is right up there, the top of the list, right? Rheumatoid arthritis, 860 people per 100,000 person has rheumatoid arthritis. Then, of course, there's other things like Hashimoto's, thyroiditis, and then the list goes on. Celiac disease right at the top, basically gluten intolerance, and things like that. And it just goes on and on and on, and literally this is the list. You can see, yeah. We could spend all week talking about each one of these diseases, right? And of course, to treat all of these diseases, what do? What do we do? Well, we use steroids. Why? Because a steroid will suppress the immune system. And yes, it seems to work. Why? Because, well, you're having an immune response, so if you suppress the immune system, then your symptoms disappear. But is that really solving the problem? It's not solving the problem, it's masking the problem. It's saying, okay, we'll suppress the immune system. NSAIDs, there are anti-inflammatory drugs, okay? Chemotherapy agents. Some people do, yeah, there are chemotherapy agents that are used for certain autoimmune disorders, biologics, different things like that. But I love what God tells us. He says, natural means used in accordance with God's will brings about supernatural results. Which means it defies logic. Because supernatural is above that which is natural. Right? Natural means used in accordance with God's will brings about supernatural results. For time's sake, I'm gonna breeze through this last couple slides. So what are the natural treatments that we would do? Okay. Now this is just like, what do we do here at UG Pines? The type of things that we've experimented with, the type of things that we've observed, and I actually talked with several lifestyle counselors, past and present, and about their experiences with different patients who have come through our lifestyle center with autoimmune diseases. And I compiled a list of these things, and I can share experiences with you about these things, okay? So, natural treatments. Exercise. Why does exercise help? Perfect health depends on perfect circulation, right? So we must exercise, and you can actually see when there are joints, when there are muscles, different things that are aching and hurting, people just start getting better when they start going for walks instead of just sitting around. Okay? Now there's more. Weight loss. Why does that help? Well, because there are people who have pressure and pains and aches and things like that, which would greatly be relieved. I'm not saying this would necessarily reverse, but this would relieve to a great degree a lot of the autoimmune issues because it relieves the pressure that's on the joints, right? Now you're probably thinking, well, okay, we know those things. Those are simple. Let's talk about some other things. Poultices. Have you guys done poultices yet? You've done some poultices. So there's cabbage, which has lots of anti-inflammatory properties, castor oil, charcoal, even other things, turmeric poultices. You can do all kinds of things, and it's just a topical application of something, right? And you put it there, and it can actually, the anti-inflammatory properties can actually penetrate under the skin and help give relief from that standpoint. Again, not a cure, but it helps, right? It helps. Herbal teas. Here are some different herbs that we've used in the past. Red clover, chaparral padiarco. They're typically used for cancer, but you can also use it in trying to help to correct the immune system. Okay, these kind of herbs, as well as using things like WWB is not a wrestling thing. It stands for white willow bark. And white willow bark is, actually it's where they derive aspirin from. White willow bark and Jamaican dogwood, those are anti-inflammatory herbs, which you can use. We actually use it for pain. That in combination with things like turmeric is a powerful anti-inflammatory. It helps to remove, literally to remove the causes of inflammation and to suppress that immune, what do you call it, the inflammation. But it doesn't do it just by removing the things that, okay, this is the part where I'm not making sense. All right, sorry. Let me rephrase. The anti-inflammatory things helps to remove the things that are causing inflammation rather than just suppressing things that are stimulating the immune response, if that makes sense. Okay. Then there's other things like infrared, that's what IR stands for, far infrared sauna, paraffin wax, which is basically just dip your joint or whatever in wax, and that heat can really help. Russian steam bath. Have you all done that? Those of you who are on hydrotherapy, any of you done the Russian steam yet? Yeah? Okay. Not yet. I don't know if they're supposed to or not, but that's a good one. And hyperthermia bath. Now, hyperthermia is basically when you induce a fever in a person. Now, I don't know if you remember this, but when we were talking about TNF-alpha and all these other boring terms, we found that one of the things that it stimulates is fever. Why would the body try to raise its own temperature? Now here's something interesting. When you get a bacterial infection or a viral infection or something, your temperature goes up, right? Why? Because that bacteria releases a pyrogen, tells the hypothalamus it's time to raise the temperature. And then what happens? Well, the body raises the temperature, and as a result, the immune system is stimulated, greatly stimulated. Your antibody production goes up, your white cell production goes up, the activity of those specific white cells increases greatly, right? And so, is the fever part of the problem or the solution? It's part of the solution, but what do we do as soon as we get a fever? Right? Pop the acetaminophen. Where's the Tylenol? Where's the Advil, right? Because we try to break it. We see it, we perceive it as part of the problem rather than the solution, right? Now, hyperthermic baths, you're wondering, well, why would you do that to yourself? Oh, you had one yesterday, nice. Feels wonderful, doesn't it? The hyperthermia bath, why would you do that to yourself? Well, because it stimulates your immune system. When you say, why would you do that when you're having autoimmune disorder? Because ultimately, it's the immune system that's designed to handling malfunctioning parts of the immune system. Did you know that? It's the immune system. God designed the immune system even to handle malfunctioning parts of itself. Because those different cells that we talked about are able to destroy parts that are not functioning right. They're able to recognize, and actually the body has a way of filtering cells that are functioning well versus cells that are not functioning well. So for example, the T cells we talked about in the type 1 diabetes that are damaged, those cells should not have existed in the first place. The body should have handled them, destroyed it, but it didn't for some reason. And so we need to stimulate that immune system to do what it's actually designed to do, which is handle the problem. The natural treatments. All right, so things like diets, elimination diets. Now this is something I really wish we had time to develop this concept of food allergies. Has anyone ever taken a food allergy test? A couple people. Food allergy. Now, elimination diet is basically where you remove the top allergens, if you will. You remove things that most people are sensitive to. In case you're one of them, you remove those things and you find that your symptoms decrease or disappear, right? And that often will consist of a gluten-free diet or a nightshade-free diet. And many people with arthritis, for example, or lupus, things like that, they're greatly alleviated when they cut out those things from their diet. Why? Well, there are people who are sensitive to these things. And when you ingest things that you're sensitive to, these things get broken down and they become assimilated into your body. Did you know that? I mean, the proteins, things like that, they actually get broken down and assimilated into your body. And if your body thinks that this thing is, remember we talked about self versus not self. And if the body thinks, hey, this is not self, this guy's not on our team, it'll start attacking it. And the theory is that even if it has become assimilated, the body will still try to attack it. And so you have an organ of the body that is now being attacked because of assimilated proteins from what we ate that we're sensitive to. Does that make sense? Okay. That's why I really like this last one, which is fasting. I don't know if you all can see that, but fasting is down at the bottom. And there is nothing that I've seen that works more powerfully when it comes to autoimmune diseases, autoimmune responses, like fasting. And again, there are many theories out there as to why it works. One that I'm working on, I need to develop it further, but I'll share it with you all. Is that okay? I'll share with you what I'm thinking, and maybe it'll develop into something someday. What I'm thinking is that because of these assimilated proteins, the body is seeing something wrong and it's trying to attack it, and potentially by fasting, of course, you go through the whole fasting cascade. You break down first of all, you use up all the glucose, as Dr. Sanchez spoke of yesterday, and then the body turns to glycogen in the liver, glycogen in the muscles, and it depletes that. And once it does that, then it turns to triglycerides, the fat molecules. And only after it's actually used up the triglycerides will it turn to proteins. Right? And when it comes to autoimmune disorders, what tends to help is not short-term fasting, but more long-term fasting. And long-term temporary, though. Long-term temporary fasting. And that's what tends to help. And I'm talking about more than a week, more than 2 weeks. And people will often get more acute during that phase, and then right after, their symptoms cease. Right? We've seen this with rheumatoid arthritis. We've seen this with even skin types of diseases with autoimmune reactions, and many different things. But fasting is really a powerful thing when it comes to autoimmune diseases. So here's the last thing I want to share with you. Is there a positive autoimmunity? What do you think? Is there a positive autoimmunity? In the book Steps to Christ 43, it says, the warfare against self is the greatest battle that was ever fought. The yielding of self, surrendering all to the will of God, requires a struggle, but the soul must submit to God before it can be renewed in holiness. Right? Is there a positive autoimmunity? I believe so. And it's only because the body needs to attack that which is not on your side. Are you following me? We need to get rid of that which is not on our side. It's not helping us, it's hurting us, right? The true fast in Isaiah 58, which won't explain it all now, but if you read it, that prescription, at the end of that prescription it says, then your health shall spring forth, speedily. And you know what the whole prescription is selflessness. It's putting yourself aside. So this is a different type of fast. Fast yourself of yourself and see what happens physically. Why do I say this? Because there is a trend with a lot of the guests who come here with certain types of autoimmune diseases, especially rheumatoid arthritis and things like that, and they have forgiveness issues. They have control issues. And I'm not judging here. I don't know everyone's heart, but there are certain things that become apparent as you spend a session with one person, and you see that, well, this person, they can't let go in this area. And in every single case, there's a selfish motive. The Bible prescription is fast yourself of yourself and see your physical health spring forth speedily. Isn't that amazing? Yes, there's a physical fast. But if you just have the physical fast, you're going to miss out the true healing. Right? There's the spiritual fast that goes along with it. So try both. Try the physical fast, yes, with all those other things we talked about on the list. And then try a spiritual fast and see if your health does not spring forth. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, Lord, there is so much in this human body, for we are fearfully and wonderfully made. There's so much to understand. There's so much that we'll probably spend eternity learning. And Lord, we don't fully understand how this all works. Why does the body not recognize certain things and it does recognize other things? I don't know. But what I do know is that you promise to bring forth help speedily. That you have the ability to heal diseases where no man has the ability to do so. And so we're coming to you, and I present each one of my friends who are here. Bless them with your Spirit. Give them wisdom. Maybe if they're struggling with their own disease, or if they know someone who's struggling with a disease, help them, Father, to examine self and to submit self to you. In Jesus' name, amen.